shift the blame around pretty evenly because, like I said at the beginning, I don't think this looks good for anybody, and I don't think Reddick is without blame here. But that statement by the Jets makes me want to tip the blame more in their direction. Um, assuming that it's 100% honest, then maybe we get back to like 50-50 blame of like, it seems like there was an understanding in place, but that's if you take it on face value and if you believe it's honest. And to be honest, I don't know if we can. And I can't say that it's not honest, right? Like, this is still an hour and a half old. This is 90 minutes old. We have no idea how this is going to play out. I'm not necessarily comfortable coming on here and saying this is 100% the team's fault or this is 100% Haason Reddick's fault. Like, I think probably the blame goes around pretty evenly here. But I think it's unfortunate that the team and the defense is now kind of caught up in the middle of this because the powers that be were not able to work it out or at least quell it enough to get into training camp with some kind of possible resolution in the near future so that we could at least go about business as usual. So I think if we're trying to assign percentages, like I would probably say, again, Reddick not without blame, probably somewhere around 25%, and the team maybe 75%, but without the facts and without seeing this continue to play out for the next few, probably I would say this has accelerated the timeline. So it's not even really probably weeks anymore, unless it goes nuclear and we start talking about sitting out an entire season, then it can really drag on. But like with what I think we all think this is, which is posturing, hopefully this speeds up the timeline and we can get to a place in the near future where we are able to assign blame a little better. But at this moment, it's just like, it's pretty unclear because I don't know who's being honest and who's not.
I saw Joe tweet about this, and he feels similarly to you in that he kind of assigned even blame. He had it at 30% to Woody, 30% to Joe Douglas, 30% to Haason Reddick, and 10% to God. I countered, which, yeah, pretty fair all around. Again, I think it's a good caveat that you brought up that we're going off information that's 90 minutes old and just what we have available to us. My counter was, I think it should be 40% Joe Douglas, 40% Woody, because at 10% Haason Reddick and 10% God, because I agree that Haason Reddick is not blameless, but it's mostly because he said in his introductory press conference that he was going to give it his all. He also said that he was going to let his agent and Joe Douglas figure out the contract thing. And so if his agent is telling him this is the move for you, then he should listen to his agent. I think players should listen to their agents there. And this is his chance to get money. This is also basically the only leverage that he has. So I understand, I saw, I think it was Antoine Staley who covers the team tweet about how Haason could have held in and there would have been some good faith negotiation there. I do think from an optics standpoint, sure. But if he holds in and shows up to camp but isn't practicing or whatever, eventually there's going to be a point where you're there and not practicing, not playing, and the season's coming up. And if stuff isn't going to plan, are you going to bail then? There at some point there is that is your leverage, is not playing. So don't play. I understand it from the player's perspective there. Joe Douglas not getting a deal done before this trade went through, I think, is the biggest mistake in all of this. But you got to kind of share the blame because he has to account for future contracts, but if he didn't account for them before trading for him, he's not as good of a GM as we're giving him credit for. But he also needs the owner to sign off on all the money that's being allocated to players. And if Woody won't sign off on the money, then Joe is kind of hamstrung. So I think that's an even split there. But I tend to view this way more, as of right now, way more on the front office than on the player, just based on what we know, and also just based on everything that's been said. Even if you do take it at face value, is Haason Reddick has been saying, I want more money. The Jets have been saying, we're going to pay you, but only if you do these certain things. And he's saying, listen, we got to figure this out before I play. That's kind of where the impetus is. And the Jets paid a valuable asset for this guy. I know we'll get to the pick in a second, but I know it's a conditional third round pick, but You had Bryce Huff in the building. You watched him ascend into a pass rusher that deserved a bag in free agency, and you let him go in and in exchange of that money, you went out and you paid an asset in order to bring this guy in the building. That's how you view him relative to Bryce Huff. So the fact that you would do that and not have a plan in place for how you're going to pay him is just completely asinine to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, considering the parameters Joe laid out in that tweet, I think I might change my answer to I think it's 50% Woody, 48% God, and then 1% Reddick and 1% Joe Douglas. Because again, this stuff just seems to happen to us all the time. Meegs actually tweeted out like there's no more predictable entity on the face of the earth than the New York Jets, right? Like it's just, and this is why the LOL Jet stuff happens, right? And why does it keep happening to us? Like it can't be incompetence that just spans across administrations and generations and doesn't matter who works there. Like there is one unifying thing at the top that, like, again, to get back to like the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. The buck stops with Woody, man. And I hate to be like super critical of the owner all the time. I feel like I probably go there a little too often, but like there's a common denominator at play.
Yeah. So as a result of all of this, and you talked a little bit about, potential jersey burning videos, there's been a crowd of Jets fans that have said, we don't need Haason Reddick. Let him hold out, play hardball. What do you have to say to that crowd of people?
Yeah, I mean, it's too fast to be saying things like that. Like again, this information's 90 minutes old. We don't know what's going on, and I think like take all of it out, put it in a vacuum. The team needs Haason Reddick. It's not a question. Like the defense was built factoring in that Haason Reddick is a part of it. We don't know where Will McDonald is. Do we all hope that he's good? And did Connor have some positive stuff in a film review? Yes. Did he look good in the preseason game? Yeah, he did. He's quick, he's fast, he's bendy. But we're talking about a starting edge that is an integral part of what they want to do on defense. And we know that the defense likes to rotate. So even if Haason Reddick wasn't as good of a player as he is, when you minus one out of that rotation, you're losing something, right? Because that's the way we play. We don't play with four guys and you're going to just slot one in behind them and say, oh, well, the talent drop off isn't that much. We play with 8-9 guys. So if you're taking a guy out of that and looking to replace him either with a guy that's at the bottom of the roster or somebody that's available in the market at this stage of the game in mid-August, we are by definition, we're losing something, right? So I think it's crazy to go that far that quickly in 90 minutes to turn heel from we want this player to no, we don't need this player and we don't want this player. So no, I cannot get behind that at all.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk. I think, it's even been said in media related tweets about how it was only a 2026 conditional third round pick and the Jets can kind of afford to wait this out. Dan put it best in our Badlands group chat where it's like, this is a defensive player of the year candidate that the Jets coaching staff has had all offseason to build their defense around. Like, this is not just, we're losing a guy who is playing hardball, deserves money, but we can easily replace him. Like, he is a foundational piece of what is supposed to be a top 5, top 3 defense in the NFL. It also, like, I think people, to your point, are like undervaluing the player that Reddick is. There have been, I believe I saw the stat. I want to make sure I get it right, but I'll double. Don't quote me on this, all right? But I was reading articles about Reddick today from his initial trade, and there was a stat about there have been 2 players with 10 plus sacks in each of the last 4 seasons: Myles Garrett and Haason Reddick, and that is insane, and especially for a team that has been dying for a consistent 10 plus sack guy since John Abraham. We say it all the time. So this is not just a replacement level player or even a player who is like Bryce Huff, who was undrafted and ascended to the point of like getting a really big bag, but hasn't necessarily been in that foundational cornerstone edge rusher role. Like, this guy was the premier edge rusher on the Eagles for the last 4 seasons. And we acquired him to be that guy for us, even if it was just in a short term. And so saying that we don't need him and we'll be fine is not an astute position, in my opinion.
No, it ain't it, man. And like, look, this has all the hallmarks of a player that doesn't have leverage right now. Like the trade compensation was low, right? Let's put aside the fact that he is a part of this defense and he's needed. The trade compensation for the player that we got was low. It's also future. It's also conditional, right? And the player is technically under team control for I think another 2 years. So the player does not have a ton of leverage here. And I don't want to be melodramatic and paint this thing as like, oh, like you got to pay the guy, he needs to feed his family. Like he does, he earns a good living right now. But any of us in our current working situation, if you feel you are undervalued based on what the market determines your value to be, and you feel like your employer is not rewarding you for what you have earned, you are going to pull these same levers, right? And it seems like Haason Reddick does not have a ton of those levers. So he's leaned on kind of like the classics, which are like, first it starts with a holdout, then it's a trade request. And like, there's really not much else that you can do there from the player's perspective. So those are really the only two levers he has to pull. So the flip side of that is that the team does have a lot of leverage, but like, what are you winning in this game, right? In this arms race, like, okay, great, you have leverage as the team, but like, what are you winning? You're not winning anything because all you're getting is the loss of a very important player on your defense. So regardless of how much leverage you have and how much posturing you want to do with statements that you put out on Twitter and with the media, it really doesn't matter because now this situation is ugly and it's sticky and you have to navigate yourself out of it. And it's going to take some really deft maneuvering and some really smart, level-headed, leave your ego at the door type stuff to get out of this, because there's going to be a ripple effect one way or the other. If you go and give the guy the bag and everything he wants, it does send a bad message that the team can be taken for a ride with kind of some of these leverage type moves. But if you do nothing and you just make the guy sit out and you just fine him to death, that doesn't send a great message either, right? Who wants to come play for an organization that's going to do that to their players who have earned the money? And so regardless of what cards you're holding or anything like that, again, I come back to that point at the beginning, like nobody looks good here. And this is going to take a lot of ego checking and a lot of smooth maneuvering to get out of and to not have a long-term lasting ripple effect from. So like these guys better like get in a room together at some point soon and stop talking through the media and be like, look, we all have to own the part of it that we owned of what's happened in the last 3 months. And we need to figure something out. We need to figure something out fast because again, the longer this drags, the worse everybody looks. There are no winners in this situation. So figure it out.
Yeah, and I think we're both aligned in that I don't think he gets traded. I do think this is pressuring. Like, I don't think this ends with him never playing it down for the Jets. I think this ultimately gets resolved the exact same way people have been saying this was going to get resolved from the beginning, by converting some more money to fully guaranteed going into the season, either giving him a 1-year bump or an extension over 2 years, something small, like not a long-term deal that will allow him to hit free agency, but get a raise over the next 2 years, some sort of middle ground. But what's really frustrating about this is that I do think this ultimately gets resolved the same way we've been saying this was going to get resolved from the beginning. And I do think that eventually the public criticism is going to turn on the Jets enough that, Woody is going to have to cave into some of these demands. And the fact that we're not speaking from any inside knowledge, but the fact that this seems to be held up by the Jets not willing to pay him additional money earlier or whatever it is in this season is just frustrating because it never should have gotten to this point. Do you agree that, this ultimately gets resolved without a trade?
Yeah, I do. I think at some point we look back on this and this was nothing, right? But it still doesn't paint over the fact that as Jets fans, like this stuff just continues to happen. We still have to sit through these weird, you know, again, right now it's only been an hour and 45 minutes, but like we as Jets fans, we have these days where it's like you're working, you're going about your business, you're doing whatever with your family, and the Jets just bulldoze into the room and blow up your life for like 24 hours, right? And at the end of the day, it's probably not super impactful to what's going to happen on the season, but we can't say that until we get into the season, because until this comes to a resolution, and like there's even like maybe it gets resolved the night before the season, and then like does he play in the season opener? Is he conditioned appropriately? Does he get a soft tissue injury in the first 3 weeks because he hasn't been at training camp and he hasn't been taking hits and he's not in football shape? So it's like, it's one of these things that could drag on, but we just don't know, honestly, probably until we get through the season, what the ramifications of this are. But I do kind of come back to the center of what you just laid out, which is like, this is probably going to get resolved. He's probably going to play, and it's probably not going to be that big of a deal, but it's just frustrating that we have to go through this all the time.